Okay, here we are. I believe that we are live now on Facebook and other streaming platforms. Welcome to Stalochokwalmach Government edition of Light the Fire with Grand Chief Steve Point and Chief Mark Point. Before we officially get started, welcome everybody that is tuning in with us tonight. We're excited to have you here with us, just as we would in any other Indigenous gathering and coming together of minds. We'd like to start the night off with an opening prayer. So I'd like to invite one of our elders, chiefs, whoever would like to say the opening prayer.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay. Grandfather, we ask you at this time to be with us in our discussion this evening. And we pray for the dear loved ones at home who might still be grieving the loss of a loved one or maybe suffering from an illness. And we ask for a blessing on our elders and our children at home. And dear grandfather, we thank everybody and bless everyone that's going to be listening in our circle tonight. The whole grandfather. Oh,
Kwasai. So this evening we have an exciting episode for all of you out there. We've decided to do a series where we talk with each and every one of our chiefs from the 6 villages that are involved in the road to self-determination and self-governance through the united front of the Stalochokwalmach government. This special conversation is sponsored by SXG, and these chats are meant to light the fire in our communities as we continue to implement our inherent right to self-determination and self-government. Since it's live streamed to our public Facebook page, don't hesitate to let your friends and family know they're welcome to watch. It will also be posted on our SXG YouTube channel afterwards so people can view it at their leisure. My name is Alia Warbis. For anybody who does not know any of the people on the panel tonight, I work with Stalochokwalmach government, formerly known as SXTA, through media and communications. Our 6 communities are Atchlets, Lacamel, Skowlook, and Chiactal, Yuccaquias, and Skowkale. We are in negotiations with the federal and provincial governments to create a government-to-government relationship that will redress some of the impacts that our communities have felt since Europeans first came to our territory. Tonight, our host, Huli Hultol, Grand Chief Stephen Point, will speak with our honored guest, Chief Mark Point, about culture, his service to the community, and his involvement in the SXG. Before we get started, I'll briefly introduce Huli Hultol, who is SXG's in-house legal advisor, the Chancellor of the University of British Columbia and former Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. Grand Chief Steve Point practiced law and sat on the provincial court bench for many years. He is also a member of the Skowkale First Nation and served as chief for 15 years between 1975 and 1999. From 94 to 99, he served as tribal chair of the Stalo Nation. During that time, the Stalo Nation entered into the BC Treaty process. And Chief Mark Point has been the chief of Skowkale since 2017. He served as counselor-in-chief before that many times before. He is nearing completion of his doctorate of education from the University of British Columbia. Serving on many boards and committees, Chief Point draws from his life and professional experiences to contribute an informed and valuable perspective. Chief Point currently serves as chair of the First Nations Housing and Infrastructure Council and for the Indigenization Committee for the University of the Fraser Valley. He also sits on the National Chiefs Claims Committee for the Assembly of First Nations, has been a member of the Cultus Lake Water Sports Committee, hosting Coast Salish traditional canoe racers, and finally, a member of the Dan Milo Longhouse Committee in Stalo Territory that provides a home for traditional Stalo culture and Smeatla in the wintertime. My role in the conversation is to start things off with a question or two and let it roll from there. Then after about 40 minutes, we'll have some time for audience members to ask questions. You can ask via Facebook or email outreach@sxgov.ca. That email again is outreach@sxgov.ca. So first of all, I've already given everyone out there a pretty good idea of who you both are, your biographies, your extensive careers in education and leadership. But I think it's great for you to be able to say, um, you know, your traditional name and whatever you'd like to share with the people that are out there with us tonight. We have 10 people currently on live with us now. So maybe we'll start with you, Chief Mark Point.
Okay. My first traditional name is Lachalton. I was given that name when I was about 17, 18 years old. Lachalton is my father's name, who's from Musqueam. About 10 years ago, my mother decided that it was time that I got a more mature name, and I'd been training under this burner for quite some time, and she decided to change my name to Chum Chamiluk, who is her great-grandfather, who was a burner from up the valley. And so that's my name now, Chum Chamiluk. I shared with one of my grandchildren, and I'm very honored to carry that name. And I'm honored to be in this forum this evening.
Thank you so much. Grand Chief Steve Point, if you'd like to share your traditional name and anything you'd like to open up the conversation with this evening.
All right, my traditional name Haliquoto. It means Speaker of the House, a member of the Wolf Clan out of Samath, and it's an honor to be here this evening again on the podcast. Welcome those who are listening, and I'm thinking we're going to have a very interesting discussion this evening, and I'm glad everybody's joining in.
Well, thank you both. And for the 2% of people that do not know, these two similar fellows are brothers. Same mother, same father, bio brothers, if you can't tell. So they've done a lot of work side by side, sort of passing the buck off to each other for a long time in leadership, and done a really amazing job in leading our family and the rest of our community towards higher and higher levels in many different arenas, including, the winter powwow ceremonies, the canoe culture, the big drum powwow, the sweat lodge, and now in these negotiations with the federal and provincial government. So they've worked for a long time. Most of their lives they're groomed to be leaders, and now they are just on the helm of something really great for our people. So you've been involved in many interesting projects, from indigenization of the academy to First Nations housing. What is your main motivation behind all of this service? This question goes over to Chief Mark Point.
I think that I've been involved in politics at one level or another since 1970, since the white paper policy was brought forward by the then Pierre Trudeau government. And at the time, I guess I was dabbling with politics and trying to understand and find a role for myself, and getting your feet wet in terms of the work that needs to be done to move our people forward. In the early 1970s, we were just transitioning from being directed and told what to do by the Indian agents and Indian affairs, the government, and our people were waking up. And at the time, there was a movement to direct our own education in the manner that we saw fit. So I got involved a bit with that in helping write the Indian Control of Indian Education document with Bill Mussel. So it's been a very, very long learning process, and I consider myself an apprentice in everything that I've done, because I sat most of the time and tried to be a good student, listening and learning all of the issues and what was going on. And and I find myself still in that frame of mind of still listening and still learning, because understanding the government and what has happened to our people is a huge undertaking. Um, and the reason I say it's a huge undertaking is because our people themselves have to stand up and say, we need change, we want change. And but our people, understanding our people, have gone through much trauma, they've gone through many hurts, they've gone through generations and generations of people without an identity, not knowing who they were or where they belonged, or how they could eventually be the authors of their own fate and their future. So that whole process of being a listener, learning, and then eventually being one of the people that had ideas and concepts and sitting there thinking that we could think for ourselves and do things for ourselves was a slow transition. And sometimes I still wonder if I get what's going on itself, because we deal with humans and we deal with people who live under poverty, under conditions that where they've been hurt, and there's been no, it's generations of hurt that they carry. And we want our people to be self-directed, self-thinkers, and have a good understanding of what we need, where we want to go, and how it looks when we get there. But we're asking of people that are still recovering from trauma themselves. So it's a pretty foggy picture that I paint, but we're moving.
And speaking of that self-direction, you've been a huge proponent of having young people stand up and use their voice, having young people join these decision-making processes, and teaching them to speak at a young age, and know and listen and pay attention to what's going on. Um, where did that idea start for you, and how do you feel like the transition is going in terms of the shift now to some of the younger people stepping up into these important roles?
Well, it's first coming to terms with the fact that you're not getting any younger. And opportunities didn't arise too often when I was young about being able to stand up and talk about what was on my mind, and think about what the issues were, because we still ourselves didn't understand the issues. But I wanted, as I was put in positions of leadership and even within our own family, I thought it was important that the young people got the opportunity to say what's on their mind, and to exercise the concept of getting up and being a leader. And so I I think that came from my mother and from listening to other people talk, and the need to have the younger people trained so that one day they will step in our shoes, and there will be an easy transition to being able to pick up the work that we do and carry on. And so not wanting to, when I can talk easily about my brother Stephen and myself, and even my brother Jeff, we were put in positions of leadership at a very young age. And for the longest time, we didn't really sort of, in my mind, contribute in a positive way to pushing our issues forward and to the forefront, and be heard and contribute in a manner that actually impacts change. So wanting a different kind of a world for our young people so that they were exposed to the issues that were going on and being able to use their voice and express their minds and do it in a manner that made sense. I just thought it was a good thing to start training them young.
You mentioned, Mark, about the white paper policy. Do you remember when that happened and what was that about?
The white paper policy was a document that came forward from the Trudeau government of 1970, and they presented it to as a draft. And I think when I sit back and think about it now, they threw it out there to get reaction from First Nations. But the whole thrust of the paper was that they wanted First Nations people to surrender their special identity and become a part of society, so that there would be no longer be special status for Native people. They would do away with Indian reserves. We would be melted into mainstream society. And that might be a good thing if all of the issues that we had on our plates at the time were dealt with. But our land claim question of the day was never ever dealt with. The Nisga'a at the time were in Supreme Court looking for a judgment on their claim that they had put forward. And our people were actually, it did one thing for us, and it woke us up to the fact that we can no longer live under an oppressed government that told us where we had to live, when we could fish, when we could hunt, what kind of education we were to receive, and even what we were to learn. And it created a movement from within. There was the old Red Power thing in Vancouver, and AIM started on the prairies, and it woke people up to say, we got to start deciding and working towards self-identity and resolving our issues and problems ourselves. So it was a good thing, because out of that, we got the National Indian Brotherhood, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the Homemakers of BC, and bands began doing their own band administrations, and it began a whole movement of self-identity, self-control, and let's look for answers ourselves from within ourselves.
That kind of unity is part and parcel of what happens when Indigenous people decide to work together rather than against one another. There's so many things that can pull us apart, including our internal issues, our family issues, sometimes in our small communities, or even the purse strings, right? That come into the picture in terms of services and service delivery. So, how does that relate, do you feel like, to some of the cultural components that you bring into your work? Because to me, it took me a long time to really see and feel those parallels between what we were doing in the longhouse or on the canoe or in ceremony into the work that we do in community. And it wasn't until later on I started to really understand what that was about, and why, my uncles and my dad and my elders really pushed culture. Um, Canoe building, you've been a long time canoe builder, working with wood and working in the race circuit as a skipper, a coach, and the whole, 9 yards. Why is culture so important and integral to the work that you do?
Well, let's first of all define what culture is. Culture is a living entity that we use as a tool that guides us in our lives, and it informs us of practice in our relationship with Mother Earth, with ourselves, with the spiritual world. And it's not something that's static, that stays the same, because we can't say our traditional ways at the time that Simon Fraser stepped off the canoe in 1808 are the same as what our traditional ways are in 2023. So what we can glean from what our elders taught us and take that and apply it to today's reality, I think is the challenge, because we often talk about what our worldviews are, but worldviews are always constantly changing, as with culture. But the important anchor about what worldviews are, it tells us about our relationship with the land, with the four-legged, the winged, the finned, and the root, what we call people. We recognize those as the entities that keep us alive, the air, the water. And our people have always had that relationship with those entities, and we acknowledge that they're superior to us, because without any of those entities, we wouldn't be here. We couldn't survive. So how do we translate into that to a modern relationship and apply that to what today's realities are? And that's a huge challenge, because many of our people today see a tree and they see money, whereas our teachings tell us that that sacred tree has a song, a spirit, and it eventually it might carry our DNA in it, and it might be part of our ancestors. And so we look at a tree a different way than some of our younger people look at it. And that's becoming an issue in the work that we do today. And how do we reconcile the differences that are being and showing themselves? And I think that has become a new challenge to us, other than just acknowledging that we're the first people, we were here first, that we have a relationship with all of these superior entities than us. Our newer challenges are understanding the world through the different lenses that are showing themselves with our people.
That's one of the things that you're hearing these days, is the land acknowledgement from the governments, at different conferences and meetings. Do you think that's uh, enough, or is it a good thing? How do you feel about that?
I think that we're going to have to revisit our relationship with everything around us, and that means air, water, mountains, rivers, so the earth, the spirit world, everything, and redefine what they mean to us. Because if we're saying one thing and a part of our people are saying a different thing, it becomes very difficult to sit down with across the table from the government, because we're sitting there with different lenses and how we see the world. And we have to reconcile that difference before we can sit as one entity. That even goes for making a treaty or making a self-government agreement. If we're sitting here and saying, the water needs to be, it's sacred to us, that we need to save it at all costs because it's there for future generations. And somebody else comes along and says, how much can I get for this water? There's a clash of values there. There's a clash of how those natural resources are viewed. And it's not they're wrong and we're right. It's change. Change takes place. What is today's realities? How do we understand? And how do we come to terms with it so that we're all sitting on the same side of the table saying the same thing? Or is that possible?
I was just wondering, do you think culture is going to help heal our people at all?
Well, I think we have to understand that, first of all, culture is not static. Culture is continually changing, and values along with culture continually change. We have people within our ranks, within the stolo, let's say fishing, for example, who complain that we never ever get enough fishing days, that we never can catch enough fish, and they take everything they can get and sell it. Whereas some of us say, we go fishing so that I can have fish on my table in the wintertime and to meet our ceremonial needs. So there's two different values. But they're same people are sitting at the table negotiating with Department of Fisheries on allocations of resources of that resource. How many days can we get to fish and blah, 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 blah. So that's only one example of the problems that we're facing internally. So is it an education issue? Is it an issue of changing times? And us not sort of changing with the times, or is it something where we might have gone a little bit astray and said that we can't be selling everything? We can't put a dollar value on things when our old people fished to survive. And to me, that's what we still need to do, is fish to survive, so that we have ceremony, we have food, and we make sure that the next generations have enough of that resource to carry on what we've been fortunate enough to access, and so that they can have fish for themselves too.
I think one of the tough realities right now, and you both touched on this a little bit, I think, around culture, is that it's not a catch-all. It certainly does have a fire igniting beneath it, I think, right now. And it just depends on where you're sitting and how you're looking at it, whether you see it as positive or negative. And maybe only statistics would really be able to tell us, but in my eyes, and from my interaction with the young people and the amount of young people that are joining our cultural circles, whether they're doing it wrong or right, I think is another discussion, because we see that all over the place, all this criticism about how we carry culture. But to me, those young people would not be okay. And I've had them personally, write to me or tell me themselves, like, I wouldn't even be here, I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for paddling, if it wasn't for powwow, if it wasn't for, dancing. I wouldn't even have made it this far. I've had so many young people come and tell me that. But I think where it starts to get a little bit tough and a little controversial is that you do have so many takes on how it's done, if it's done properly. You do it at 4 o'clock, or you're supposed to do it in the morning, or they're not supposed to be wearing those, they're not treating them properly. It's like everybody's sort of scrambling, right, to get involved and I think try their best. I see the young people doing these cultural jams now, and there's all sorts of different criticisms about them wearing regalia and what, if they're allowed to be wearing jackets or skeets this and all these things. And I just think, well, it's good that we keep discussing and we keep being critical of ourselves. That's how we grow. We keep trying to teach them the proper and the old and the traditional ways as much as possible. But man, I'd rather have them be there doing it improperly and be willing to learn than not have them go at all because somebody scolded them out of it, or embarrassed them, or told them they weren't doing it right. Like I'd much rather have my son asking to go to Coastal Jam than going to like a party on the res or something like that. They want to be involved, they want to drum and sing, and even my generation didn't want to do that. We were so embarrassed and so backwards about being forced to be cultural by our parents, and our kids are not like that. Our kids want to be doing it, but there's a lot of talk, and a lot of it happens online, I think, which isn't a great forum for it to happen, where people are being very critical of these youth who are basically trying their best, I think, but maybe need a little bit more guidance. And that's just my input, like sort of what I'm seeing from my perspective. And I have young kids who want to be involved in the culture.
I think what we need to actually talk about is not the change in what's taking place out there. We need to talk about basic parenting. We need to talk about the need to strengthen and re-strengthen the whole family unit. I give high credit to my brother Stephen too. He's always got his grandchildren, and they gather around him and they're going here and they're doing that. And they're at home with them. To me, that's the way it should be. Grandparents are the original teachers. And we have so many young people out there that are lost, that haven't had good guidance when they were growing up, and haven't got strong attachment. And by attachment, I mean nurturing, loving, knowing who they are, being proud of who they are. And so the need to, and I'm kind of mixed when I talk about this kind of stuff, because it's like saying you haven't been a good parent, saying that to all of our parents out there. But it's not their fault. It's like, and I have the same conversation with my wife about people who are abusers. Somebody abused them. And the thing is, well, where do we stop and how do we impact change? How do we move back to times where parents are doing what they're supposed to be doing, grandparents are doing what they're supposed to be doing, strengthening the concept of family. My wife and I have spent our whole life, virtually all my money that I've ever made, on acquiring logs, making canoes, bringing our canoes to races. And I paid for that out of all my own pocket. And I don't go around telling people, that I paid for this and I paid for that. But that's what we did, so that our young people have something to do, so that they have a place to go to, then they could be proud of what they do. And I can say that I just look at my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, and they're actively involved, and your children are involved, Stephen's grandchildren are involved. So there must have been some positive impact there somewhere. And that's what we need to move back to, so that it's happening everywhere, not just at Skokale, not just at Squaw, or not just at Caldas Lake, so that every community is doing something. And I know that people would love to be picking up and either creating song and dance and participation, but they don't have the core needs, the elders or the teachers to help them get into that practice. And so it's up to all of us to help people do that. And to understand that's, if we're to heal and if we're to understand better who we are, what we are, where we need to go, that whole concept of resurrecting strong families and strong communities needs to be undertaken. And it ain't gonna happen out of having big bank accounts.
Yeah, and speaking of the impact of culture in those canoe clubs, that canoe club has expanded now into 5. That's 100 people that get to paddle, because there's all those seats are available. All those leaders had emerged from those early movements, and it is really positive part of many communities now. What are your thoughts around leadership without culture? Kind of a loaded one, but what are your thoughts about leadership without culture?
I don't think there can be such a thing, because our culture is what we stand on, where we draw all of our, the core. We're informed by our culture. We're informed by what our teachings are, what our spiritual beliefs are, our relationship with we use the example of my brother and I, and we're very, very close. We're very close spiritually. And I'm not sure that there are many people that have that same kind of relationship. And so leadership without culture is, you might as well go sit in the House of Parliament in Ottawa and see how those people treat each other. They shit on each other virtually. People get up and leave. They're so disgusted on the kind of talk that goes on there, how they respect women. You talk to Aboriginal women that have sat in those chambers, and they're disgusted with what goes on there.
Mhm.
So to me, that's the answer.
Mhm.
Culture or politics without culture doesn't exist.
Mhm. We do have a question coming from one of our listeners, viewers today. We have 27 people online with us now, listening in live. Um, how can we do basic parenting? And you answered part of this question, I think, already, but I'll include the entire statement. How can we do basic parenting when some healing hasn't taken place? And how do we encourage and help guide people into healing? So maybe you can talk about that through programs, through culture, but I feel like you kind of answered that question when you had talking about when you talked about traditional parenting and the family unit.
Well, I think the discussion around healing is very important. And when people need to talk about it, need to say, I need to heal, I think we need to hear them. And
Yeah.
we need to help them uncover not why they're hurting, but how they can find, how they can move forward. Because I'm a person that says we have to stop the blame game and we have to look for solutions to how can we heal and how can we help our families heal. And when we uncover all of those things, we find a path forward, and that's where we go.
Mhm.
So healing to me it needs to be talked about. And people that need to heal, I think it's a great thing when people can say I'm hurting and I feel that I don't have an answer or solution to why I hurt, but how can I move forward and get to a space where my hurting is lessened, or where there's less hurt and more positive stuff in my life. And each of us goes through times in our life when we're depressed, when things have happened to us and we're not happy about it, and we think that there's no way out, and I've had times in my life when I felt like that, and I was fortunate enough to have people around me that could help me out of that. And so there's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's nothing wrong with recognizing that there are people that are good helpers out there, and we need to lean on one another. I heard some good talk today. I had to help put away a young person today, and I listened to some other people give some teachings. And one of the things that I reheard, that, it's always good to hear the teachings over and over because that's how long it takes to sink in, is when we lean on each other in a good way and ask for help and look for people that act in a positive way and do good things to help other people and to forgive.
Mhm.
That's a big challenge, is to forgive. And so
Yeah.
I'm always learning that. To this day, I'm 74 and I'm still learning stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree too, because a lot of the things I've seen in either family or community, it surrounds conflict and old history, and people stay stuck in that, and that piece to forgive and to move on is it leaves fractions of families in different places, and I feel like the healing through again, culture seems to be the main sort of theme here. It can happen because that's where you learn who your people are that are like you. You lean, for us, we lean on the people in our canoe club or our extended longhouse family, and they come to your life for a reason. They add strength. Um, Speaking about sort of back to a little bit of your personal history, you talked about buying logs, acquiring logs, making canoes. How did that start? Like, what? I don't even actually personally know this history. And so I'm interested. I'm sure other people are. How did that first start? Was it with the brothers or with you into, building those first canoes?
My brother Jeff and I began paddling when I was 14 and he was 15. And we paddled with other canoe clubs, and we always ended up on the beach at canoe races because there was always somebody better that they put on. So it got to the point where one time we trained and trained and trained, we still ended up getting put on the beach, not participating in the race. So I just said one time, we got to make our own canoes and we might as well make our own club. So that was the beginning of the old 5-star, is getting that going. And there was no way we could afford to buy a canoe. So I talked to my mom about that, and she said, well, why don't you go and ask somebody if they could teach you? And so I did. I began reaching out, and in those days, our people were kind of funny. If you went near their canoe, they'd chase you away. They'd tell you, you're going to work on our canoe, get away from us. And it was kind of funny because the last thing we knew how to do was work on a canoe, spiritually, And so I just decided one day that I was going to try to make a canoe. And I went and seen this Julita man down the road that had logs in his yard. And I asked him if I could buy one. And he asked me, what are you going to do with a log? And I said, well, I'm going to try to make a canoe. And he said, a dugout canoe? And I said, yeah. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll bring that log over to your place. You just pay for the trucking. And that's how I got started. I didn't know how to use a power saw. I axed a whole canoe out, but I made a single paddle canoe and I still have it under my patio.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Never ever would have ever thought that you still have that first canoe you made.
It's called Baby Duck.
Wow. So going from the single then up into the bigger that goes double 6-man 11, do you remember the first 11-man that you worked on?
Yep. The first 11 I ever made is Salish Dancer.
Oh, mm.
I
And
started it the day after Christmas. It was a log that I had acquired. I paid for that log. I had it delivered to my yard. I still didn't know how to work a power saw. And I would harass my dad to come out and sharpen my saw. I had a power saw and harass him. And he said, I'm not going to do any cutting for you. You got to cut it yourself. So I would go see Uncle Dominic in Musqueam and try to get him to come up and show me the basics. And he wouldn't come up. He told me, if you have it within you to make a canoe, I'll tell you what to do. You go home and do it. That's how they taught in those days. And that's how I learned. I came home and flopped around for a few canoes and finally made one that looked like a canoe. Our first 11-man that we made is now in Musqueam. It's I think they're using it. It's called Celtic Sunset. Uncle
oh,
Dickie's using it.
that's a good canoe. And they used that canoe to start bringing paddling back to Musqueam because they were not paddling for, I mean, you might know how many years, but not since I was paddling, 20 years ago. They weren't paddling then.
Yep, they were gifted that canoe, and that got them going again.
Yeah, that's very cool. Very, very cool. Um,
We also brought Roy Edwards over, eh, Mike? Roy and his brother.
Yeah, they came over, and this was after, that was our second canoe. That's where we started using the name 5-Star, because the first 11 men we made was actually called Lady 5-Star. And we said we want to make a man's canoe, and we made the original 5-Star canoe. And Uncle Roy showed us the basics of how to make a canoe, how to cut out a canoe. But it was still in a time when people were stingy with their information and all of their secrets that they had. And so he helped us along with the basic concept of what a canoe should look like, its shape. And from there, we made, I don't know how many canoes I've made. I've made lots. There was been races where first, second, and third place were canoes that I made.
Hmm. It's funny that you say that too, way back when that people were really, really superstitious and not letting you near their canoes. Um, is that where that teaching comes from, where people don't step over another person's canoe or walk underneath it? Is that like the same kind of teaching or superstition?
I I don't know. You know what? I don't have problems with people walking under my canoe. I think that's a little over superstitious, but that's just me. If somebody has to walk past my canoe and they walk under it, as long as they don't bang their head, you know.
I just think it's really like interesting to break those sort of things down, because to me sometimes, people don't know the history and how it carries forward, so they do things without question ever, like we're taught. But you got to wonder sometimes, so I had to ask. I just had to ask.
Well, I have a lot of funny stories about people
Yeah,
superstitions around canoes.
yeah. And then people kind of start to get crazy, like you said, they bite your head off and get really, you know protective and everything.
I
We
think
have.
I think there's one important aspect of the canoeing that needs to be um, shed some light on, and through the years, Mark and Jeff worked with young people. I work with young people, teaching them how to pull on a canoe. And the truth is, like if you have a baseball team or a soccer team, the coaches and the people that are running become the mentors for the young people. And when you start a canoeing, when we were canoeing, we were taught you can't drink pop anymore. You can't eat hamburgers or French fries. You can't leave the camp when you get to camp. You can't get angry on the canoe. You can't talk on the canoe. There's all these protocols and things that we teach the young people. And they're good for the young people because it's self-discipline. And a lot of parents would send their kids with Mark and Jeff. Mark would load them up on his truck. They'd all be on the back of his truck going up racing every night. Every night for months, they'd be training. And then they get to races, you got to bring food. All the women would cook and work together, making the meals every day. And they would pay for the gas to get there. And then when you win a race, maybe you get $5 or so, $10, something like that. They didn't do it for the money. They didn't do it for the money. They did it because it was cultural and because it was helping a lot of young people. A lot of young people through the years have benefited from belonging to the canoe club and the self-discipline that comes with it, training and the running. That we used to have to run every night right up to the top of the hill behind Cullis Lake and run back. When we were pulling with Spryhalla, we used to run from Cullis Lake all the way to Spryhalla Reserve from Cullis Lake. And so this is good exercise, it's good discipline, it's good diet, and it's good physical. And you learn to listen to your elders, you learn to behave yourself. And so I can't imagine all the programs that you would have had to have in order to raise those young people the way they're raised in the canoe club, right? I can't imagine how many youth counselors would have been needed, or how many hours of programming you would have needed. But this was just a normal thing for canoe clubs, not just in our area, but across the nation, even on Vancouver Island, Lemmy, Connor, they all had clubs where they took their young people and trained them, run them, made them fast, and So it's a whole dynamic that promotes community wellness. And that's the aspect that sometimes we overlook, and canoe clubs, in my vote, we don't get enough support to do what they're doing for the community. It's tremendous service.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree, and I think through some of the programs like First Nations Health is and Fraser Health, they're kind of waking up because some of our own people are now working in leadership in those organizations that they're actually bringing money to the canoe clubs, you know, and recognizing all of that work that is happening from all the way from the youth to we have people who are still paddling in their 50s, 60s, 70s, still out there being healthy and we need our elders with us, to help carry this incredible load of culture and teaching. We have 45 people on with us now, tuned in with us live on Facebook. It's really, really great to have you all with us this evening as we speak with both Chief Mark Point, Grand Chief Stephen Point, about Skelkale's involvement in inherent self-rights and our road to self-determination through Stalahuahuawa government. If you're just tuning in, just an update around some of the main topics we've talked about: culture through leadership, paddling, community programming, cultural leadership. I think one of the things we have to absolutely touch on is Skelkale's involvement with Stalahuahuawa government, which is, sort of the umbrella for these 6 communities to do this work around self-governance. And how you feel that this work is beneficial to Skelkale specifically.
Who are you asking?
That's directed to Chief Mark Point.
Okay. Well, the treaty process has been around for quite some time, and Stephen was around and the leader then when the treaty process got underway. And people at the time were looking for establishing a formal relationship with the federal and provincial governments and doing away with the antiquated Indian Act. And I think that we still need to do away with the Indian Act. And we're trying to uncover ways and means to establish our own self methods of governing ourselves. Are we big enough? Are we mature enough? Do we have enough people in our communities to sit together, to work together, think together, plan together on finding our place in this country? And I think that that's the work that really needs to be done is where do we fit in? We talk about trying to get control of the resources. And in southwestern British Columbia, most of our resources have been logged out, been mined out, and there's so much of the land is covered with urban sprawl that what's left for us to actually grab a hold of and develop and use for our own types of income that we need to be self-governing, because we have to eventually pay for our own way. And that's the big challenge, isn't the original intention of establishing self-government institutions in our communities, is that still a realistic goal to move to? I personally believe that we have a lot of healing to do. We have a lot of, we create interest and voices out there of our people to participate in the conversations and the thinking and planning and moving forward of where we need to go. and I'm really impressed with our young people, their ability to think. And once they get their own, I think the strength that they need to be able to stand up and say what they think and what they want to do and where they want to go to. I think that opportunity and that challenge is what we need to be working towards, is training and encouraging our young people to get more involved and to, I don't think we're going to find the answer in the years that we're going to be at the table. It's a long and lengthy process to, first of all, the government has to be willing to surrender something for us to fill that vacuum, that place at the table where we're self-governing, where we control our own resources, where we have enough people that still have the basic concept of Wilmuch, our heart, our mind, and our spirit, um, to move in that direction, to develop our people. Is it still a realistic goal that we're a separate entity? Is the concept of the white paper policy reemerging?
Mm. Mm. In different.
I think one thing that could be added here and is that um, getting onto what Mark was saying earlier, that things change, things are changing, and I think part of our whole thrust on the reserves has been trying to grapple with the change and not that see things change too much, because change is meant for Indigenous people loss. It means that we lose things. Change has meant that things are being taken away, and so I think there's a big concern in Indigenous communities about things changing and not remaining the same. Indian reserves have been housing Indian people as wards of the government for a long time, and I think since the white paper policy, Indigenous people have been fighting against the government who've been wanting to end reserves, because Indigenous people see reserves in two things. One is a kind of a holding tank for Indigenous people, but the other as an enclave for our culture, a place where our culture has been able to survive, where we've been able to keep our family ties together, where Indigenous people at least to be able to stay together and live together in one community.
Mm.
And I think there's a big fear that if we move away from the Indian Act, then we're going to lose this enclave of cultural comfort and family comfort and whatnot. And but I think a lot of leaders view the Indian Act as being old, antiquated, and even unnecessary today. But if the struggle is what to do about that. Where do we go from here without losing our identity as Indigenous people in these reserves that and serve this two-headed process, one of kind of keeping us here as prisoners, but the other hand, preserving what little we have left from the colonial times and colonialism. So it's a problem. I think it's a dichotomy, and I agree with Mark that it's going to take a while before we can come to grips with it all. And it's a heck of an interesting time to see other communities moving towards self-government, getting their own legislature, getting involved in economic development. But I share Mark's view that we can't lose our self-identity in this process. We can't lose our connection to the land and who we are as Indigenous people, just for the sake of maybe getting a few more dollars, right, to run our own affairs. How do we maintain who we are, get our language spoken again, and that sort of thing? Because if we lose that, then we've lost the battle, in my view. If we lose our self-identity. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question from Tynesha Commodore asks from our live Facebook group, what happens if the Indian Act is removed? Which you addressed, but maybe you can answer more directly from a practical standpoint. Again, what happens if the Indian Act is removed? I think that probably that's related to like maybe rights or lack thereof. And what if the people aren't ready for that? It's a two-parter. Whoever wants to take that.
Well, let me challenge the listeners to understand that um, if the Indian Act were to be removed tomorrow, right, without any other uh, arrangements for self-government, then we would fall under the authority of the provincial government and the municipalities. And but we don't want that to happen. We're not ready for that. And what we prefer is to have our own self-government in place as it exists now in West Bank and in Sechelt and Mishka territory, Tsawwassen, that before they eliminate the Indian Act, that something else has to be in place, that they can't just leave us in the lurch, right? And the concern that a lot of people have is that if we got away from the Indian Act, then all our services for health and education and all of this would end. Of course, that's exactly our concern as well. We want all of these services to continue. We don't want them just to pull the Indian Act out from under the rug and then not have to cover our services, because our people are still suffering from a colonial hangover yet. So services have to continue. But we want to share the resources leaving our territory now. We want some share of the forestry, some share of the water rights, some share of the mineral rights. And we want to be able to say whether they're doing it right or not, because they're not doing it right these days, destroying the land. So our say in self-government can become very important, and we can create a better future for ourselves as we move towards self-government. But it's just going to take time.
Mhm. Okay, we're getting close to having to wrap up. We didn't even get through all the questions. We do promise people that we're online for an hour. So I don't want to go too far over. We have one last question from a listener, as far as I can see, and that is from Karen Goodfellow. What role do you see the assimilated among us to contribute to this? And I think that's probably coming from the topic we were talking around. I think culture and leadership playing a hand-in-hand role in our communities moving forward. So tough question. I don't know. I'll repeat it one more time. What role do you see the assimilated among us to contribute to this? And I think she means maybe the movement.
Well, yeah, everybody's assimilated. Like Mark was saying earlier, things have just changed. I don't speak the language. We have a lot of our culture that survived, but many of us are assimilated, right? And but those of you that are outside of our communities, you can help us. You can, and we want to create a membership list based on whether you're scholar or not whether if you're assimilated or not. And so if you have rights to the land because of ancestry, and we want to include you. And we need all kinds of people as we embark upon self-government. We're going to need accountants, we're going to need doctors, we're going to need lawyers, we're going to need surveyors. So if you've got these kinds of skills, the sad reality is that within our communities, we're short on some of these skills because our people have struggled with colonialism and struggled with getting through education. So we do need this help, and there will be a place for you if you are scholar.
Well, it's been a really enlightening talk. I feel like we could easily have done a part two, just expanding on so many of the thoughts that you both had around culture, leadership, and just where we're going right now and how the young people can become more involved. I want to thank you both for your time. I know it's a busy weekend. Many people are rushing and heading down to Lummi for the next canoe race, which you'll both be at as well. So I want to thank you. I want to invite any more comments from any of our listeners about the content or the conversation. Email us at outreach@sxgov.ca. If you have suggestions for other conversations you'd like to hear, let us know. Email us, comment onto the Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. We intend to have more events like this, so stay tuned. We're slated to have 2 Light the Fires in July with Chief Angie Bailey and Chief Thompson. And those are going to happen towards the end of the month on July 17th and 24th. We also have a healing conference that's happening in the community of Swally, and that's going to be between August 4th and 6th. Anybody is welcome. Please register. The posters and advertisements will be out very soon. One last thing from Marty Jimmy. Getting to sit and listen to you made my day. Positive comment from our relatives across the line there. So we have people from all over Coast Salish territory. 46 people are tuned in, listening and watching. Those are really, really great engagement numbers. So good job. And thank you so much for being a part of our event. Light the fire, and just know 100 names were taken down of different people that came in and out of the conversation that we engaged with tonight. So thank you very much. Kwasai.
That's good. That's good. Bye. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
See you in Lummi.
Yeah, see you, mommy.